June 13th, 1942, 0215 hours. Amagansett Beach, Long Island, New York. The Atlantic wind cut like a knife through the fog, carrying the briny scent of salt and diesel. Far out beyond the breakers, a dark mass broke the surface. U-202, a German Type 9B U-boat, rising from the depths after weeks of silence beneath the Atlantic. Its steel hull hissed as compressed air bled from ballast tanks. A single red light glowed on the conning tower. "Los! Schnell!" barked a voice from above as the hatch swung open. 4 men climbed into the night, their breath visible in the cold air. They moved with urgency, lowering a rubber raft into the churning water. Beneath their oilskins, they wore plain civilian clothes, the uniform of men who must never be seen. At the head of the group was George John Dosh, 39, thin, sharp-eyed, with the cautious gait of a man used to living 2 lives. Once a dishwasher and drifter in New York, now a trained agent of the Abwehr. He had returned to the land he once called home as part of Operation Pastorius, Adolf Hitler's most ambitious sabotage mission against the United States. The orders were clear. 2 4-man teams would infiltrate the East Coast, scatter into the heartland, and cripple the American war machine. Aluminum plants in Tennessee, hydroelectric dams in New York, canal locks on the Ohio River, all would burn. "Keep low," Dosh whispered as they climbed into the raft. "No mistakes tonight." The sea slapped against their boots as they rowed toward shore, crates of explosives and cash stacked beneath their feet. Each man carried a false identity, a new name, and a carefully crafted cover story. They were ghosts already, strangers in the country they would soon try to wound. At 0240 hours, the raft scraped sand. The men jumped into the surf, dragging their cargo up the moonlit beach. The shoreline was deserted, silent, but for the hiss of waves and the whisper of the wind across the dunes. They worked quickly, burying wooden crates beneath the sand and marking the site with a cross of driftwood. By dawn, they would be gone. New York streets would swallow them. America would never know they had come. Then fate intervened. 0218 hours. A faint crunch of footsteps echoed down the beach. The men froze, heads snapping toward the sound. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged. A young man in a Coast Guard uniform, a flashlight in one hand, and a rake slung over his shoulder. "Evening," he called out, his voice casual but curious. "What are you fellas doing out here?" Dosh's pulse spiked. The man was Seaman John Cullen, 21, on routine patrol. This was not part of the plan. "Our boat capsized," Dosh said quickly, his German accent cutting through the damp air. "We were fishing." Cullen frowned. "At this hour?" His eyes darted to their clothes, too neat for fishermen. His gaze lingered on the sand piled near their feet. Dosh stepped closer. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "No reason to cause trouble." He reached into his coat and pressed a thick wad of bills into Cullen's hand. "This is $260. You never saw us. Understand?" The young sailor's mouth drew dry. It was more money than he'd seen in months, but something in the man's eyes, a desperate intensity, told him this was no fishing party. "Sure," he said softly, stepping back. "I didn't see a thing." He turned, walking calmly into the night. But the moment the dunes swallowed him from view, he broke into a sprint. Within 20 minutes, he was pounding on the door of the nearest Coast Guard station, breathless and pale. 4 men, strange accents, civilian clothes. They tried to pay me off. The report was relayed to the FBI New York field office before dawn. At first, agents assumed it was a false alarm, a drunk fisherman perhaps. But the details gnawed at them. The bribe, the accents, the urgency. Hoover's agents were told to stay alert. Meanwhile, Dosh and his men vanished into the night, boarding a train toward Manhattan. They believed the encounter meant nothing. They believed they were invisible. They were wrong. In less than 2 weeks, the most ambitious Nazi sabotage mission of the war would be in ruins, undone not by counterintelligence brilliance, but by a young sailor, a hunch, and a train ticket.
June 14th, 1942, 0930 hours. Penn Station, New York City. Steam hissed from the brakes as a commuter train screeched to a stop under the steel arches of Penn Station. In the morning crush of businessmen, sailors, and factory workers, George John Dash stepped onto the platform wearing a plain gray suit and carrying a leather valise. He blended in perfectly. That was the point. Around him, America roared with wartime purpose. Posters screamed, "Loose lips sink ships," and "Buy war bonds." Soldiers kissed their sweethearts goodbye beneath the station clock. Vendors shouted headlines from the Pacific and North Africa. No one paid any attention to the soft-spoken man with a faint German accent walking toward Lexington Avenue. Dash and Ernest Peter Berger checked into a small midtown hotel under false names. Their comrades Richard Quirin and Heinrich Heinck boarded a train west toward Cincinnati. In less than 48 hours, 4 more saboteurs, Edward Curling, Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, and Herbert Haupt, would land near Jacksonville, Florida, aboard U-584. The two teams would reunite, coordinate operations, and begin a campaign of sabotage designed to shake America to its core. They had studied their targets for months. Alcoa aluminum plants vital to aircraft production. The Horseshoe Curve Railway in Pennsylvania, a choke point for military logistics. The Ohio River locks, which controlled barge traffic supplying the Midwest. The plan was textbook sabotage, coordinated, deniable, devastating. But George Dash's mind was not at ease. That night, lying awake in his hotel bed, he replayed the scene on the beach in his head. The flashlight, the suspicion in the young sailor's eyes, the weight of the bribe in Cullen's trembling hand. "What if he talks?" Dash whispered in the dark. Berger, sitting by the window and smoking a cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Then we disappear," he said. "America is too big. They'll never find us." Dash stared at the ceiling. "I don't understand this country," he murmured. "I lived here. They don't stop once they start looking." June 15th, 1942. Amagansett Coast Guard Station. At that very moment, Dash's unease was becoming reality. Seaman John Cullen's report had triggered a quiet but intense investigation. The FBI's New York field office, under orders from Director Edgar Hoover, began combing train stations, ports, and hotels for any sign of suspicious activity. It was too unusual to ignore. 4 men with German accents, civilian clothes, and a suspicious amount of cash. It didn't fit any known smuggling operation. Agents theorized it could be a Nazi infiltration attempt, though many dismissed the idea as paranoia. Still, Hoover wasn't taking chances. "Follow the money," he told his men. "If they're here, they'll need to move it. They'll need to spend it. That's where we'll find them." June 17th, 1942. Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. Hundreds of miles south, the second phase of the plan was unfolding. At 0045 hours, U-584 surfaced just offshore, its crew lowering 4 more saboteurs into a small raft. They rowed silently toward land, waves lapping against the sides as their mission began. Unlike the Long Island team, this landing went unnoticed. Within hours, the Florida group was on a northbound train, 1 man to Chicago, 1 to New York, and 2 to the industrial Midwest. The Abwehr's plan was in motion. On paper, it was flawless. But there was one flaw the planners in Berlin had never considered: George John Dash himself. June 18th, 1942. Lexington Avenue Hotel, New York City. Dash sat by the window, staring out at the endless tide of taxis and pedestrians below. He had spent the previous night in a haze of cigarette smoke and doubt. The mission, once so clear, now felt like a suicide pact. "I don't think we can win," he said quietly. Berger looked up from his newspaper. "What are you talking about?" "This country," Dash said, gesturing toward the city outside. "You know how many factories they build in a month? How many tanks, planes, ships? Even if we succeed, even if we blow up a bridge or a plant, they'll replace it before Berlin hears the explosion. Berger scoffed. Our orders aren't to win the war. They're to hurt them, to show them we can reach them. Dash shook his head. We're not reaching them. We're waking them. Over the next 48 hours, Dash's doubts hardened into something else, a plan. If the FBI was already hunting them, they would be caught eventually. And when they were, the punishment would be certain and brutal. Execution. But what if he changed the game? What if instead of being caught, he turned himself in and brought the entire operation with him? It was a thought that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. But the longer he lingered in the country he once called home, the more inevitable it seemed. Ernest, he said one night, staring into the darkness of their hotel room, I'm going to talk to the FBI. Berger blinked. You're insane. No, I'm going to survive, Dash replied. June 19th, 1942, Washington, D.C. By sunrise, Dash was on a southbound train. In his valise, beneath a false lining, were code books, lists of German contacts in the United States, and a portion of the $84,000 in cash. His destination was clear: FBI headquarters. The saboteurs believed they were invisible, ghosts scattered across a continent too vast to be policed. They had no idea that one of their own was about to expose them all. And when he did, their mission and Nazi Germany's faith in sabotage would collapse in a single, shocking blow.
June 19th, 1942, 10:15 hours, Mayflower Hotel, Washington, D.C. The lobby smelled of polished wood and cigarette smoke, the kind of grand wartime bustle where uniforms mixed with business suits and the clack of heels echoed off marble. George John Dash crossed to the front desk with a leather valise that seemed to weigh more than his arm could carry. He asked for room 904 in a voice so steady it surprised even him. The elevator groaned upward. When the doors slid open, he stepped into the corridor and listened, muffled radios behind doors, the faint rattle of a cart. He unlocked 904, set the case on the bed, and closed the curtains against the noon sun. A black rotary phone waited on a lacquered desk. For a moment, he only watched the dial glint. Then he lifted the receiver. Operator, a crisp female voice. Number, please. He said, FBI headquarters, Washington. A click, static. Another voice, lower, indifferent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. What is your business? My name is... Dash swallowed. Say it. My name is George John Dash. I have information regarding a German sabotage operation active inside the United States. I will only discuss this with a responsible officer. Silence stretched so long he heard his pulse in the handset. Sir, the voice returned, careful now. Remain where you are. Dash placed the receiver down with 2 fingers, as if it might burn him. He unlatched his valise and peeled back the false lining. Code tables, addresses, cover identities, stacks of U.S. currency still bound in paper straps. He laid them out on the bed like instruments arranged before surgery. He told himself the decision was survival. That wasn't entirely true. It was also confession, and a wager that America would not put a rope around a man who handed them an entire enemy network in one afternoon. June 19th, 1942, 11:42 hours. Mayflower Hotel, room 904. A sharp knock, then another. Mr. Dash, Special Agent Dwayne L. Traynor, FBI. Open the door, please. Dash disengaged the chain. 2 men entered, jackets cut short over shoulder holsters, hats still on. The younger one scanned the room, jaw working. The older kept his hands visible, palms relaxed. You made a call, Traynor said. This is your chance to convince us you're not a crank. Dash stepped aside and gestured to the bed. Agent eyes hardened at the sight. Money, documents, a small tin box of detonators wrapped in cloth. Traynor didn't touch anything. He looked at it all, then at the men who had laid it out. Talk, he said. Dash did. Calmly at first, then faster, as if the sentences might outrun the fear. He named Ernest Peter Berger, Richard Quirin, Heinrich Heinck. Their landing on Amagansett Beach after midnight, June 13th. He named Edward Curling, Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, Herbert Haupt. They're landing near Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, before dawn June 17th, from U-584. He described training at Quentz Lake outside Berlin, the Abwehr handlers, the intended targets, Alcoa, the Horseshoe Curve, Niagara Falls Power, Ohio River locks. He described dead drops, rendezvous points, sum totals of cash issued, and the precise phrasing of Berlin's instructions. The younger agent tried to keep up, scribbling. Traynor didn't write at all. He watched the man's face, measuring cadence, checking for the tics of a liar. None came. "You're telling me," Traynor said, "you walked into the Capitol to hand us Hitler's saboteurs." "I'm telling you," Dosch replied. "I know how this country moves when it is awake. You will catch us with or without me. With me, you catch us faster." "Why?" The word was not hostile, curious like a scalpel. Dosch looked at the curtained window. "Because I have no intention of dying for a plan already lost." Traynor nodded once, a tiny movement. "You'll come with us." "Without cuffs," Dosch said. "If you put cuffs on me, I stop talking." Traynor considered, then turned to the younger agent. "Bag it, everything." To Dosch he said, "No cuffs, for now." June 19, 1942, 13:25 hours. FBI headquarters, Washington, D.C. A bright room with a humming fan and a bare table. Coffee gone cold. The overhead light gave everything a hard edge. A stenographer took her place in the corner, keys hovering like talons. "State your full name," Traynor began. "George John Dosch." "Nationality?" "German by birth, American by choice, once." They went for hours. Addresses in Queens, a locker number at Grand Central, the alias George Davis on false papers, a Chicago exchange where Haupt would call his parents, a contact who answered only to the name Kolpow, a ghost note that would not matter today but would matter later. For each assertion, Dosch produced something physical, a page from a codebook, a receipt, a torn scrap bearing the start of an Abwehr cipher phrase. He gave them timetables, trains, the kind of details invented stories never have, like the smell of fuel oil the night U-202 surfaced, the exact pattern of the driftwood cross on the beach, the $260 bribe pressed into a young sailor's hand. At 1600 hours, Traynor's boss stepped in without introducing himself. He wore certainty like a uniform. "Director Hoover wants names, locations. We move tonight." "Then listen," Dosch replied, voice thin but steady. "Start with Berger. He will fold. Quirin and Heinck, New York. They're cautious but not cautious enough. Curling and Thiel, Cincinnati. Neubauer, methodical. Haupt, Chicago. He will make a mistake because he thinks America is still his home." "What mistake?" Traynor leaned forward. Dosch hesitated a heartbeat. "A ticket. The wrong one at the wrong time. He will keep a route that does not fit his story." "Explain," the boss said. "Spies are taught to vanish into patterns, but patterns can betray you. The line he takes to meet a contact won't match what he claims to be doing. That's how you find him, on paper, before you find him in person." The stenographer's keys hammered the thought into permanence. June 20th, 22nd, 1942, New York, Cincinnati, Chicago. Orders fanned out by teletype and telephone. Field offices stirred. Men checked hotel ledgers, watched platform clocks, asked routine questions with unblinking patience. The Bureau was not omniscient, it was relentless. And it had something omniscience often lacks, a map drawn by the enemy himself. New York. Agents shadowed a modest walk-up near E71st Street. Quirin and Heinck were seen entering at dusk, leaving at odd hours, cash-heavy, language careful. Cincinnati, a wiretap caught a phrase no ordinary traveler used. Curling and Thiel were taken quietly in a boarding house stairwell that smelled of cabbage and coal dust. Chicago, a clerk frowned at a customer's story, then at his ticket. The route didn't match his stated job. She sold it anyway, then telephoned it in, the way posters told her to. When Herbert Haupt appeared again, the eyes of the city were already on him. By June 27th, the net cinched tight. Every man named was under surveillance or in cuffs. None of them knew why the doors kept opening in front of agents as if the locks had been drawn from the inside. June 22, 1942, 2040 hours, FBI interrogation room, Washington, D.C. Traynor returned with a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Dosh," he said, setting it on the table, "this is a receipt for your property and a record of your cooperation. The director will see you." Dosh glanced at the door. He said, "I've given you everything. You'll remember that." "We will," Traynor replied. He didn't smile. "And so will the president." Dosh closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he let exhaustion pass over him like surf. He had bet his life on American procedure, on signatures, on paper, on men who believed in both. Outside the window, Washington glowed under wartime blackout, a city humming with engines and intention. Across 1,000 miles, trains slowed, tickets were checked, and a paper trail birthed in Berlin led straight to American hands.
July 8, 1942, 0815 hours, Department of Justice Building, Washington, D.C. The corridors were silent, except for the rhythmic click of polished boots on marble. 8 men, tired, unshaven, wrists bound behind their backs, were led down the long hallway beneath a line of flickering fluorescent lights. They did not speak. Their faces betrayed no fear, no regret. Only the dull acceptance of men who had seen the end before anyone told them it was coming. At the head of the line walked George John Dash and Ernest Peter Berger, the 2 men whose confessions had turned an ambitious sabotage campaign into a disaster. Behind them shuffled Edward Curling, Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, Herbert Haupt, Richard Quirin, and Heinrich Heinck, the last remnants of Operation Pastorius. They were not headed to a courthouse, not to a jury of peers. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had ordered a military tribunal, secret, swift, and final. Their charges: conspiracy, espionage, sabotage. The punishment, if convicted, death by electrocution. July 9, 1942, 0930 hours, room 523, Department of Justice Building. The tribunal chamber was bare, a raised dais for 7 Army officers in uniform, a prosecution table stacked with evidence, and a small defense bench where 8 chairs waited. A guard checked his watch and nodded. The doors opened and the saboteurs were brought in under heavy escort. The Chief Defense Counsel, Colonel Kenneth Royal, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and rose. "These men," he began, "are entitled to the same rights we would demand for our own soldiers abroad. Even in war, the Constitution must remain our guide." Across the room, Attorney General Francis Biddle was unmoved. "They came here to burn bridges, destroy factories, and kill civilians. They came not as soldiers, but as assassins, and assassins deserve no protection under the laws of war." The atmosphere was electric. These were not arguments over facts. Those were beyond dispute. The trial had become a test of principle, of how far a democracy could go to defend itself without losing its soul. July 10th to 20th, 1942. Over 10 days of testimony, the prosecution built an airtight case. Photographs of the Amagansett landing site, explosives retrieved from beneath the sand, code books, forged papers, and thousands of dollars in Nazi funds. But the most devastating evidence came not from the FBI, but from George John Dash himself. Calm and unflinching, he walked the tribunal through every detail. Their training at Quens Lake, where Abwehr instructors drilled them on sabotage, demolition, and deception. The U-boats that carried them across the Atlantic, U-202 and U-584. The orders from Berlin, signed and sealed by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. The targets they were to destroy, and the timeline they were expected to follow. They taught us how to blend in. They taught us how to hide. But they never taught us how to succeed against a nation this determined. "Do you regret your actions?" the prosecutor asked. Dash stared ahead. "I regret nothing, except that I ever believed this plan could succeed." Across the room, Curling's hands clenched into fists. "You betrayed us," he shouted, surging to his feet before guards forced him back down. "You betrayed the fatherland!" Dash did not flinch. "I betrayed a suicide mission," he said quietly.
July 27, 1942, 1100 hours. The tribunal recessed for deliberation. It took less than 5 hours. All 8 men were found guilty on all charges. All 8 were sentenced to death by electrocution. But behind closed doors, Roosevelt faced a political dilemma. Dash and Berger had cooperated fully. Without them, the others might never have been caught. To execute them alongside the rest might discourage future defectors. To spare them might enrage a public still seething from Pearl Harbor. The president's decision balanced justice with pragmatism. George John Dash's sentence was commuted to 30 years in prison. Ernest Berger received life imprisonment. The remaining 6, Curling, Thiel, Neubauer, Haupt, Quirin, and Hank, would go to the chair. The tribunal was adjourned. There would be no appeal. August 8, 1942, 1300 hours, District of Columbia Jail. The execution chamber was quiet, cold, and metallic. At 1:04 p.m., the first switch was thrown. By 1:25 p.m., 6 men were dead. Their bodies were buried in a potter's field under numbered stones, far from the Reich they had sworn to serve. The speed of the process stunned observers. From landing to execution had taken just 8 weeks, a record in American legal history. For Hoover and the FBI, it was a public relations triumph. For Roosevelt, it was proof that the United States would meet Nazi aggression not just on the battlefield, but in the courtroom. And for Hitler, it was humiliation. August 9, 1942, Wolfschanz, East Prussia. 8 men, Hitler spat, pacing his war map room. 8 men, and they are dead before they even set a charge! Admiral Cunara stood silently. He had warned the Fuhrer that the plan was risky. He had not warned him that it would end in catastrophe. "Cancel all operations," Hitler ordered. "No more saboteurs, no more landings. If they cannot succeed, they will not try." With those words, Operation Pastorius was over, and with it, Nazi Germany's ambitions of sabotage on American soil.